As a matter of fact, I think we realize that the older we get, that we're not always going to please everybody else, especially if any of you are managers and supervisors. You've learned sometimes you have to give your people bad news, or sometimes you have to say no to something. By the way, speaking of not always worrying about what everybody thinks, who here has ever heard of a famous psychologist named Dr. Daniel Amen? Anybody? No? All right, well, maybe he's not so famous. Anyway, he has what's called the 18-40-60 rule, which is when you're 18 years old, you worry about what everybody's thinking of you. When you're 40, you don't care anymore what everybody thinks about you. And when you're 60, you realize nobody's been thinking about you at all. Many managers, supervisors, and team leaders are promoted to leadership positions based on their hard skills or their technical skills, and yet for many of them, they've never had training in the area of people skills, how to communicate effectively, and in some cases, most importantly, how to resolve conflict. So one of the things we're going to be focusing on is how to manage difficult employees. What I've noticed is when there's a difficult employee who's continuously difficult, why are they that way? Typically because there's no negative consequences. And if there's no negative consequences, what's the employee's incentive to change? As a matter of fact, studies are showing the number one reason why managers and supervisors fail to address performance problems is because for most of us, we want to avoid conflict. For example, maybe some of you have an attitude employee. By the way, do you all know who that person is? They want you to know. You're lucky. They showed up for work today. Maybe for some of you, you have the system worker. You're managing someone like this. These are the people who operate at borderline capacity. They know just exactly what they can get away with. And typically what I've seen as I've been going around the country conducting speaking engagements for the last 11 years, in some cases all over the world, is typically when there's a difficult employee and they're continuously difficult, why are they this way? Because usually there's no negative consequences. And when there's no negative consequences, there's no incentive for the difficult employee to change. Let's say you have an attitude employee. And let's say that every time you delegate a special project to this person, they, okay, whatever. Well, obviously, they've got the wrong attitude. But what are you going to say to this person, and what are you going to document? Because employment attorneys are saying nowadays not to use the word attitude with an employee. By the way, why do you all think that you don't want to use the word attitude with an employee?
It's too subjective.
Okay, it's too subjective. It's nebulous. It's not specific enough. And after all, we want to look objective, not subjective. So what would you document? I wouldn't want to document every time I delegated a special project to Pat, he or she had a bad attitude. Why would I not want to do that? Because worst case scenario, if I ever had to terminate the employee and they filed a wrongful termination lawsuit, most likely anything that you've documented would be read in front of a jury. And if all I've written is so-and-so had a bad attitude, if a jury were to read that, they're going to be thinking, well, what did she mean by attitude? Yeah, I mean, all it says here is bad attitude. There's no specifics. So you want to be very specific in what you document.